Geherlich, thank you very much. Taoiseach, I've got 5 minutes. I'd just like to touch on a few different issues. One is the single supervisory mechanism, which obviously came out of the recent meeting. Now, Taoiseach, the logic on the single supervisory mechanism goes as follows, that it will lower the risk because if the ECB is in charge of the banks, we won't repeat the mistakes of the past. Now, this is not necessarily true. It's a very dangerous logic, and I think one you hopefully will be cognizant of during our presidency. The argument goes that if the ECB is in charge, the banks will be well regulated, better regulated than they were in the past. For that to be true, it assumes that the ECB is technically proficient. But the ECB has been technically flawed in its response to the Eurozone crisis, as we know. Two decisions in particular which have hit Ireland. One, that no European bank would be allowed fail, and two, that no senior bondholder would incur any cost of their investment. We all know the results of that for us here in Ireland. And not only is the ECB, I would argue, Taoiseach, act in an economically, technically flawed manner, I would argue that its reaction, particularly in these two issues, which have socialised private sector losses, are immoral, certainly as judged by the values of our society, as judged by the values of the European project. So there is something very dangerous potentially happening here, which is an institution which has acted technically incompetently, and I would argue in an immoral way contrary to the values of our society and to the European project, is being put in charge because there is a general acceptance that they know best. So I would just ask you to be very cognizant of that while you're at the helm. They don't necessarily know best. They haven't acted well at all, necessarily. A lot of the people who will be in there are people who are in the central banks around the Eurozone who haven't acted correctly. And remember, Taoiseach, if the ECB gets it wrong, and inevitably they will get things wrong, that becomes a systemic problem. If you have isolated errors, like in Ireland, in Spain or whatever, the system can correct itself. But if the ECB gets the regulation wrong, and they are more than capable of getting it spectacularly wrong, that error will apply everywhere in the Eurozone. So I just ask you to be very cognizant of that. The second is around President Schulz's concern about democratic accountability, which he has raised here now several times. I am deeply concerned about this. I've looked in detail at the two-pack, at the six-pack, at the fiscal compact, at all of these bits and pieces. And they're incredibly complicated. We in the Finance Committee struggle every week trying to just get our heads around the implications. As the rules become more and more complex and more numerous, there is an inevitable ceding of democratic control from elected representatives, like the members of this House, to technocrats. It's something we need to be very, very careful of. And I was particularly concerned at some of President Van Rompuy's recommendations. In particular around, and you mentioned it in your statement, agreements of a contractual nature. Now, my understanding of what he's saying is when you, the nation-states, submit your budgets to us, we will, invisible technocrats will look at them against a wide range of economic measures, and then we're going to make suggestions to you to correct your budgets. And what President Van Rompuy seems to be saying is, well, by the way, we don't want them to be suggestions. I believe that President Schulz's concerns about democratic accountability are very, very profound and very serious right now. And finally, Taoiseach, I'd like to talk about the pronote and the perception of Ireland and an opportunity we may have. As you know, I believe the pronote should not be paid. I don't believe it should be restructured unless it's €1 a year for 30 billion years or something. I don't believe it should be restructured. I don't think we should pay it, but I'm not in charge, so that's just my opinion. But I believe that some of the resistance is due to a very clear perception in the Eurozone establishment that we're doing fine. And we can deal with it. Now, Taoiseach, I am impressed by how the international media is reporting you at the moment in coming up to our presidency. It is reporting you as very clearly saying and not letting go of the fact that Ireland needs a very substantial deal on the banking debt. And that is to be commended. My concern about the senior European politicians and technocrats during the presidency is that they'll fly in, they'll stay in the Merrion, they'll be wined and dined in Ivy House or in Dublin Castle, they'll fly out, and the concern is that actually they won't see it. So I would ask you and your team to be creative and think about, are there ways that they can see the food queues at the Capuchin Centre? are the ways they can see the impact of 435,000 people unemployed, and so forth. And then finally, and my time is up. Finally, Taoiseach, I've said it once before, I'd just like to repeat it as you go into these negotiations, is the danger of limited success. There is a danger that we will get a small deal and that you will feel you have to take it and bring this back and say, look, this is success. And it is analogous to the distress mortgage being put on interest only. I would just urge you to be very clear on the fact that we need a very big deal, and a small deal may be worse to take in the short term than a big deal. Thank you.